Welcome to Intelligence Real and Imagined from the Work AI Institute at Glean. This is the show where we sort through what's real, what's hype, and what actually works with AI at work. I'm your host, Rebecca Hinds, and I lead our Work AI Institute here at Glean. And throughout this series, I'll be joined by my co-host, Bob Sutton. Bob is a Stanford professor emeritus. He's an organizational psychologist. He's a best-selling author, one of the founding members of the Work AI Institute, and he's a longtime collaborator and friend. This is our very first episode. Thank you so much for joining us. We're kicking things off with the AI Transformation 100. This is our flagship report from the Work AI Institute. Bob and I collected insights from more than 100 leaders, researchers, and builders and distilled them into 100 ideas that just might change how you work with AI. And today we're joined by Arvind Jain, CEO and founder of Glean. We're talking about what happens when AI starts changing the fundamentals of how we work, how it reshapes expertise, and the balance between experts and novices, how change spreads top down and bottom up, how to move fast without breaking things, and how to turn AI from a flashy pilot into something that actually works. Let's dive in. So, Arvind, it seems like every leader right now is saying they want to transform their organizations with AI. What separates the organizations that are effectively driving change versus the ones that aren't?
Yeah, one of the things that we have noticed that drives success is leaders who are focused on business outcomes and thinking about how AI can actually impact those core metrics that they have in the business, as opposed to just like, hey, just use more and more AI in the enterprise. And also like leaders who are sort of fundamentally thinking about AI as a core part of their strategy.
Bob, that's definitely something we've seen in our conversations with leaders recently. It needs to be a commitment. What else have you seen in terms of the leaders that effectively are driving change versus not?
Well, the main thing I've seen is spending the last few months with you doing all sorts of interviews to develop this list of 100 sort of ways that AI might transform work. But one of the things that really has, I think, struck both of us is this notion that when leaders see things in terms of black and white, on all expertise, all novices, all centralization, all decentralization, whatever, those are the ones I worry about. The ones that seem to be doing the best are the ones who are navigating these tensions and trade-offs in an evidence-based and curious way. I would describe it as.
And I think those tensions are something we've seen time and time again. And one that we detail in our report is between novices and experts, right? In many ways, AI is changing who has expertise in organizations, changing who has the monopoly over expertise. Bob, there's this fascinating debate right now as to whether AI makes generalists more powerful in organizations or specialists. Where do you stand?
Well, I hate to be an academic and say it depends, but I mean, just for example, it depends more where you are in the creative process. Experts are really, really great when you know you're going down the right path, and you just want to have them implement what has been proven and always done. But the problem is that when people are experts in the wrong things, and they're not seeing it with an open, curious eye, what you get is simply replicating the mistakes of the past by people who are powerful. So, and we see actually AI can enable both of those things to happen. So to me, it's a lot of a matter of when and where, rather than experts or novices. Who do you pick? Arvind, it sounds like you've thought about this some too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the AI is like bringing that capability, that information, that knowledge at everybody's fingertips, and so I think it does up-level quite a few people, like with capabilities that they didn't have before, and so I sort of feel like it is an equalizer in some ways.
Yes.
And it's enabling fall score behind, to sort of like spring forward.
Yes. So the second tension we see in this report is between centralization and decentralization. This question of where should AI live in your organization? Should it be centralized in a center of excellence, or should it be pushed more to individual teams to manage and oversee? And in many cases, it's a hybrid.
Yeah.
Bob, how do leaders think about this trade-off between centralization?
Well, the whole tension, people have been arguing whether centralization is best. And there's people who want authority and want to be in charge. And then there's the people who want freedom and everybody should be able to do whatever they want. And that argument has always really annoyed me, because it is a classic case of, well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you want to have a risk mitigation, or you want customers, for example, to have a consistent experience, I'm sorry, you need standardization and you need centralization to make sure it's sort of the same. They don't let you do whatever you want when you run a McDonald's, just for example. But to the extent that you want to have variation and creativity, that's where you push the authority down the organization, and you encourage people to try a whole bunch of different weird things, hopefully in a way that you won't mess things up. And my own employer, Stanford University, we've got this wonderful thing, my favorite current employee benefit, the AI Playground. It's got virtually every major AI tool, and they keep upgrading it. And they encourage all employees to use it and figure out ways, and students, anybody else, to use it in their jobs, to try to figure out how to use it, whether you're a low-level staff member or you're running a huge research lab, you can sort of figure out how to mess around with it. So a lot of it depends on essentially whether you want to have standardization or creativity, and there is a tension between the two.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's fascinating, just as the org structure, you sort of need to think about that balance. In technology, you do as well, right? You need a central source to understand that, everyone's following standards, it's secure, responsible, but you also need to give teams the flexibility to be able to develop those workflows and customize them to their ways.
I mean, so one of the mottos we talk about, which I stole from my friend Diego Rodriguez in the report, is he asked this question, where's your place for failing? Mm-hmm. And any place that you're going to learn by failing without really doing too much damage, I think that's where you want some decentralization. Mm-hmm. But I don't want it in a coronary care unit at Stanford, for example. I want a little standardization.
Yeah. I think there's also one more, thing here, which is, well, ultimately, AI, is better be a core part of every business process in every single department in your enterprise. If it is not, then you're not leveraging the technology as you should. So it has to be, and to make that happen, it has to be decentralized in some way. Like, every department has to sort of think, AI native. Yes. And but the problem is that right now, like, first, like, everybody's busy and they don't have time to figure out like what AI can do for them. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. And so it does make sense, in my opinion, like, when you have a centralized team, it can actually serve the purpose of ensuring that progress is happening. They're not responsible for anything other than making AI work in your enterprise. So like that focus helps, like, them not only like, bring the consistency, as you said, like, of, using AI the right way across all the different departments with the right security, with the right governance, but also like, they just push it. They push, they drive education. Yes. They help, every team understand the power of AI. And in fact, like, if they don't make progress, they're going to be trouble. So I think that actually was also important, because all the other functions, they got their core function, and AI is just only one, an additional thing. But for the centralized AI team, they're fully measured on success with AI. So it sort of helps to have that, and it may be a temporary phenomenon. Like, I think ultimately, AI will become part of our, basic existence. So, those teams may not actually be necessarily be long lasting.
So I mean, one structural solution, which I'm thinking of other mature things, let's just spread accountants, talk about something financial, like we take them for granted. Yeah. There's always some finance person in every team. Yeah. that I think will know that AI has been really spread when there's an AI person along with the finance person, along with the marketing person, along with the HR person, and then we'll see it matrixed in a lot of big companies like Procter & Gamble. In fact, I suspect they're already doing it, knowing how Procter & Gamble works. But to me, that's a sign it's a more mature sort of discipline. And in the case of, let's just take, finance or accounting at Procter & Gamble, there is a central accounting group, but then there's a whole bunch of people spread out across the different businesses too.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a kind of sign that we'll see that it's a mature field, if you will.
Yeah. And Arvind, one of the steps you've taken at Glean is to create this new role that we call an AI outcomes manager. Talk to us about why you decided this role was important and some of the impact you're seeing.
Yeah. Well, so Glean is an enterprise AI platform, and we give our customers this ability to really go and with their business people, not even with their technology people, they can go and build agents and automate some of their business processes. And from our side, we thought we built a really easy to use product, that is intuitive, and I can talk in natural language and build agents and automate all this work that I had to do manually before. And so we thought that this is going to be a quick success, and as soon as you bring the tool to an enterprise, everybody's going to adopt it, and all these business processes are going to be done. They will build agents, but what we saw was it was actually hard. It didn't happen. The tool is easy to use, but people actually don't understand what AI can really do for them. People don't even know how to prompt it, how to ask it, what the right capabilities are, and it was clear that there was a need for education. And so this team that we built, the AI outcome managers, their job is to work with customers, understand what are the business processes that are the most time consuming, the most costly ones, and then bring and share of those business processes, what are the things that AI can actually today do a good job automating. And so they're sort of bringing just that education of what AI can do for you, and they also bring shared learnings from our entire customer base to each new company that we go and work at, and that has actually driven a lot of adoption and success for our agents. So mostly it's a role of education.
Yes. It's fascinating, right? Because we see with centralization, decentralization, often there's these creation of new roles, either informal roles or formal roles. Bob, we've encountered some situations where leaders are grappling with whether to create a new role or whether this new thing is a skill that should be vested in multiple people's roles. We've heard of prompt engineering as one example. Yeah. Should prompt engineer be a role, or should it be a capability that's vested, embedded in multiple roles? Bob, how do leaders decide?
It's interesting because it's one of those questions that every day I change my mind about it slightly. But I guess where I'm at, and it's funny because I just reread our report the last 2 days from beginning to end, mostly we work on little pieces. And the thing that really strikes me is I actually don't care exactly whether it's infused in everybody or their specific role. What I care about is people are actually using it on the job every day versus just doing window dressing. And the window dressing can be everything from somebody who seems to have a visible prompt engineering or head of AI, blah, blah, blah role and doesn't have any power. Versus somebody who really has a lot of power and is influencing everybody. So I guess that's where I'm at. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. But what I worry about is whether it's window dressing or real use. So if a company buys your product but doesn't use it, it's kind of cool to make the sale, but it's not going to spread if everybody actually uses it. That's the other thing, is that they'll buy stuff and then not use it. Which is the classic thing that happens with all known products and not just software.
Yeah, it's actually that's a really good point. Are you becoming an expert at prompt engineering and driving the models to do some work for you, versus somebody in your company did that for you. Now are you actually making use of AI on a continuous basis? I think it's enough, as you said, to even just not become that expert at prompting, but just making AI part of your day-to-day use. And I think that automatically at some point it'll help everybody even develop those prompt engineering skills. The more you use the product, you don't have to start being creative on day one. You use first and then you learn how to sort of improve
it's the Ethan Mullick, you get 10 hours. 10 hours. After 10 hours you can kind of do something.
So speaking of Ethan Mullick, another topic of conversation right now is around flattening the org chart, right? Does AI enable you to have fewer layers within the organization? Bob, we spoke to one of our good friends and colleagues, Michael Arena, as part of this report, and he drew the distinction between heads up versus heads down work as a key decision factor in helping you decide how much you can flatten, to what extent. What did you learn from Michael?
Well, Michael. So Michael's he is not a normal business executive. He's been head of talent of AWS and General Motors. Those are big freaking companies, and also he's a world-class academic researcher all at once. I don't even know how he does this stuff, and he's got his team has some great data. And it's interesting when you think of NVIDIA, that shows it always doesn't apply. When people get more than about 10 people reporting to them, they start getting overloaded, exhausted, and the people who work for them don't do a good job because there's bottlenecks and all this sort of stuff, and they're not getting enough personal development. So that was the general effect of his. But why don't you talk a little bit more about heads up versus heads down, because that's one of the limiting factors that he talks about.
And I think it's a framework. It's not a rule. But he describes heads up work as you're building relationships with people, you're communicating, you're collaborating, versus heads down work, you're very much independent work. And his argument is the more heads down work is happening in an organization, the more you can afford to flatten. If you start to flatten when you're surrounded by a lot of heads up work, you're going to start to overwhelm the people who need to be engaging in those relationship building activities. Arvind, I'm curious because you've seen multiple large companies and thought about organizational structure. You're thinking about the org structure at Glean. Do you think about the layers within organizations and the steepness differently for Glean now versus, say, when you were co-founding Rubrik?
Yeah. Well, I think first AI does give us that ability to do some of this heads up work that, like you said, in a much more effective fashion. For example, if you are trying to understand what each one of your team members is doing, what work they've done, what help do they need. Before you had to actually spend a lot of time with each one of those team members to try to understand, like, in the scope of their work. Now you can actually have AI go and really create those, great summaries of like what every one of your team members is up to. And so understanding, the work of your team, finding, opportunities to help them, wherever they need help. A lot of this stuff, can actually, AI can, come and become a really good aid for you. So I do feel like, there's an opportunity for everyone to be able to increase the span, not just the type, the team sizes, but also the type of work they can do. And it will as a result, help us sort of get to more flatter organizations. Now I think it should be clear that I think everybody desires the organizations to be more flat. It's obviously it's more cost effective,
right?
But also it actually it sort of makes communication better in some ways. You don't have the trickle down from the top to the bottom. The information loss reduces. The more the organization is flat. So I think it's a great. It's one of the greatest gift that AI is going to actually bring to organizations. So we are at Glean similarly thinking about it. I guess mostly it is for me. It is about just fighting with my team members, who trying to always get more people or build more layers. And now I actually ask them this question that how are we managing the team right now? And why can't we actually why can't we manage a few more before we create one more layer?
So this is something that it's just a huge topic right now, but I'm thinking about because the Jensen Huang situation where he's got 65 direct reports, how he does it, and everybody keeps thinking about that, and so I asked a friend of mine, his name's Pete Newell, he's now a defense contractor, but he had 4,000 troops reporting to him in Iraq. So he's an old combat leader, and it was interesting. Both he and Jensen say the same thing, which is the mission is the boss. And so I said, so what does that mean? He said, well, you can have a really flat organization. He said, all the people who were reporting to me, I don't have any control over them. They're out in the field and doing these little skirmishes and stuff. But when they have when they understand my intent and what the intent and mission of the organization is, I don't have to watch them that closely. And I think that's something that it's interesting because Jensen brings that in the debate. And I think that's in the flat versus tall discussion. I think it needs to be brought in more because if everybody knows what they're supposed to do, then you don't have to have a lot of one-on-ones with them. You don't have, and you're also not constantly correcting mistakes they make because they know what to do. So I'm really thinking a lot about that. Is that if people know what they're supposed to do, you don't have to manage them that much. And AI can help with that. So. As you just said so well.
And as Bob, we know from previous work that it's about half of people can't tell you what they're responsible for in terms of goals. They can't tell you the organizational goals, and without that clarity, you absolutely need more structure.
Yeah.
So another tension that we uncovered in the report in our conversations was around speed and fast and slow. How, there's a lot of pressure right now to move quickly with AI. When do you move quickly versus when do you slow down? Bob, this is something you've studied in so many
too much. The best I can do now for organizations is to use a race car analogy, which is that if you just go pedal to the metal the whole time, you're just going to smash into the wall. But the way to go fastest down the straightaway is to know when to brake so you can make it out of the turn, know when to pit stop, and when the car blows up, it's time to leave the racetrack. And in some ways, I think that analogy works in the companies I've seen over the years, not just in AI, but the ones that know when to sort of slow down and to figure out what's going on and what needs to be fixed. But when they know what to do, then it's let's shut up and put pedal to the metal and not argue about what we're going to do. So that rhythm, I think, applies to almost all human endeavors. And we've all been in organizations that go too fast and ones that go too slow. The worst ones are where after a decision is made, people don't believe it's a decision. They still argue the decision. They try to undermine the decision. That's not what you want. But in organizations that work great, people just have a sense of when to go fast and when to go slow. And in the report, we have all sorts of empirical evidence that, that's the hallmark of great companies is they know when to slow down and fix things or figure out what to do. But when it's time to go, everybody goes.
What's your viewpoint on when, if any, situations in terms of when pilots work versus when they tend not to work effectively?
Yeah. If you look at the last 2 years, enterprises, they did a lot of POCs, a lot of pilots. And many times they didn't even have a clear reason for why they were doing it. It was more like, this looks like a cool capability. Let's go and see, how well it works in my enterprise. And you're not yet tied them to, what are my key business priorities? What are the metrics that I'm trying to actually move? And therefore, should I actually be more careful in terms of what projects I should be really first, starting. So I think what I feel, it's the right approach is first, think about not doing 100 projects at the same time. Pick the 5 most important ones across your enterprise, and they have to be associated with what are your top business priorities, and then instead of having the mindset of that, hey, I'm just trying this experiment or a POC, you start with the intent of that I'm actually going to build something in production. Sometimes you start these POCs and you don't have your teams really bought in. For example, many of these AI capabilities that you're trying to bring, they actually they're hungry for data. They need to actually connect with your internal systems, understand your business, and then try to actually do something, with AI to automate those business processes. But if you have these POCs and you're not really bought in, sometimes you've seen customers will say that, hey, let's do this POC. We don't have to connect it with our real systems. Let's just connect it with some test data and see what happens. And that's sort of all signs of that. Look, you haven't really have, you don't have the right teams bought in. You don't have the business behind you, and the POC ends, and you sort of are left with should we do it? Should we not do it? So those are some of the things which I would say, like try to stay away from, and like start again with what are the top 5 things for our company, and like get that support from the beginning. Your security team should actually know that this is an important project. This is not a POC. This is something that you're rolling out in production, so that we can sort of go smoothly and work with real data and solve problems.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really interesting point. 'Cause I'm just thinking of every failed management movement I can think of,
Yeah.
or at least ones that sort of faded. Design thinking, which I was part of, Agile, which I've been on the edge of, and I don't mean Agile software development. Agile got spread to everything at one point,
Yeah.
and you end up with this situation where people think that they're adopting something by doing a whole bunch of cute little experiments, and they experiment for experiment's sake, or they prototype but they don't actually ever want to implement it. They just want to do it to show they're cool and have fun.
Yeah.
And so that is, it's just because Rebecca actually helped with this book. We wrote a book on scaling about 10 years ago, Huggy Rao and I, and this is a definition of bad scaling, is when you just sort of dabble and aren't thinking what's the step to spread it across the enterprise. Or worse yet, you spread something across the enterprise which isn't strategic, which wastes a bunch of resources and screws up the company. So that's even worse. So I think you're absolutely spot on. Because creativity for creativity's sake is actually useless. It's kind of fun. But if you don't have a path to implementation, you're messing things up. So I really like, your attitude is rare, actually.
And I also think there's a component of, labor of love. The fact that if you fully invest in this, sometimes it's called the IKEA effect.
Yeah.
If you truly build something, if you're in the trenches, you're going to be more committed to it down the road anyway. Yeah. And we saw that in multiple points throughout the interviews, right?
Yeah. So one of the most interesting interviews we did with a guy I've been teaching with for years, Perry Claiborne, but he's a real entrepreneur. He's founded companies and everything, and more than 100 classes have been founded in his companies. In his classes at Stanford, and he said one of the downsides of AI for coming up with prototypes to start a company is, he says, it's just too easy to develop a good idea, so you don't struggle enough for it. So then when you test it, you don't struggle enough to have it actually succeed. So he's having this kind of easy come, easy go effect, even when it's a great idea. So it's funny that AI can make things too easy, not enough struggle.
Yeah.
And then the last tension we unpack is top-down versus bottom-up change, right? We know that absolutely you need top-down change in organizations, you need policy principles, but you also need bottom-up change, and everyone needs to be using the technology to see real change. Bob, how do leaders think about this balance between top-down change, bottom-up change?
Well, there's always arguments about what's better, and I hate to be a boring academic, but to say yes, when we see system-wide changes happen in organizations, well, first of all, it's the leader's job to make the decision. You got to reinforce it. You got to provide the resources, and you have to stop doing things so people can focus. That's all great. And there's some things, we talked about standardization earlier, and it's a weird analogy, but we just did a case study of transformation at the Department of Motor Vehicles in the state of California, which it doesn't seem related, but there's this guy, Steve Gordon, who is a tech executive who did it, and his team made all these top-down changes and rules and allocated budget for digital transformation and all over the place. But then he visited all 180 field offices and collected ideas and encouraged people to come up with solutions that were then spread throughout. And I thought that was a great example, because he and his team made a lot of authority-based decisions, but then they went sort of bottom-up to collect ideas and to do some local prototyping too.
So Arvind, when we think about bottom-up change, how do you as a leader think about activating bottom-up change and ensuring that everyone within your organization is able to use these technologies and use them effectively?
So the real impact in the enterprise happens when everybody in the company is adopting the new technology. AI has to come to people for it to be fully sort of become part of their day-to-day work.
And is that equally the case for AI agents versus traditional AI assistants? Does it become more important?
It's better to embed agents also like in your workflows. So as opposed to like thinking that like I do some type of work and I'm going to actually invoke an agent to do it. Like like it should become natural. Like I'm in the system where I do that work, and the agent sort of automatically comes in and adds value to me there.
So that's a really interesting tool to me because it's a standardized tool that enables hyper-localization all at once. So, and it's also woven into the nature of the work that they're doing.
Exactly.
It's not a separate thing. So those to me are two hallmarks of things that actually stick, as opposed to this thing you do off to the side that isn't really my work.
A lot of these tensions fundamentally come down to leadership, right? How do you lead your organization through this type of change?
Yeah.
Arvind, I've heard you say that AI has changed how you lead, how you manage.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, so first, just for me personally, I have a, one thing I learned is that, I'm a difficult person to work with. Like people have tried to tell me that, like for the first 20 years of my career, I never knew that. And so it's a new learning. And one of the reasons why I am difficult is because I just keep asking questions. I don't stop. And these questions actually have a cost. Like, when I work with my direct team and ask them a question, they take it seriously. Like I was not really like thinking that seriously when I actually pose the question. But then sometimes, people do 2 weeks of work to actually answer that question, which I was, was just a curiosity that I had. So for me, but it's important, I need to understand how a business is doing. So I still have those questions. And what AI is now helping me with is it becomes, that first stop, like for any question that I have. And I go and I can ask, arbitrarily complex questions here. For example, how is this part of our business, doing right now? What are the key risks, that we have, for our engineering team? Or like, I'll go and ask AI that, hey, go do some research on the web and tell us like, some new things, that we should be building. So these are all like, complex questions that sometimes, I would ask our chief product officer or our chief technology officer, and I'll consume a lot of time for them. But now I'm self-serving myself. So that's one big change for me. Like, when you can bring all the knowledge in the world, all the knowledge inside your company, and like, with that amazing reasoning and thinking capabilities that these models have, it's sort of like, I have these infinite set of like, amazing teammates, that are very knowledgeable. And I would rather first go to them because, it doesn't take, that valuable time away from the rest of my team. So that's one big change I've made, which is making AI the first, colleague, that I'm going to actually, get my work done for.
Bob, you've studied something called the amplification effect or the magnification effect in terms of how a leader's actions do have these massive outsized.
Oh yeah. So whether or not it's interesting. I'll make a comment in a second. But whether or not leaders realize there's all sorts of evidence that when you're in a position of power, people are watching you much more closely than you are watching them. And this happens with baboons too. It turns out that the what do you call it? The lower level creatures watch the alpha male a lot more than the alpha male watches them. And some of it's number and some of it's adaptive.
Yeah.
But the thing that from your story that makes for a great leader that I like is I would go back to self-awareness, and it's back to the baboon troop. It's understanding what about them when they're watching you, what bothers them and what you need to amplify. And that's exactly the kind of self-awareness that I would think is important. And it's kind of interesting the degree to which you said, I ask so many questions, I have to be careful because it starts rattling people, but you still need answers to those questions to do your job. The other thing that I think is even, and I think about what's really important in the age of AI that's always been important, but even more important is because there's just so much noise. And this is one of the main things that almost comes out of our report. There's inconsistency in noise. Like, what's our strategy?
Yeah.
What do we do? Is AI good or bad? So to me, it's in it. You talk about the importance of having strategic intent, knowing what your strategy is.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, especially as organizations get larger and more complex, there's all this evidence that leaders have to say fewer things and have to say them over and over again.
Yeah.
It's even more important now, so people know what to focus on and what to ignore, because it's one of the noisiest times I've ever seen in business, and I've been watching businesses for a long time. Yeah. And so when you're pretty sure you have the right strategy and the right work practices, say the same thing over and over again, no matter how bored you get as a senior leader. I think that's really important right now.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Arvind, Bob, thank you so much. What a great conversation. If you thought so too, subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time on Intelligence, Real and Imagined.